Hey, folks, welcome back into the Willis Show. Today, my guest is my good friend, Jonathan Bolick, a.k.a. Crazy Train. That's why the graphic just says Crazy Train, because Jonathan's too long to spell. What's going on, man?
Not a whole lot. Not a whole lot, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for if my face moves around. I'm having to hold my phone by hand because I'm not high tech like you.
Man, you
So.
gotta get one of those little. You gotta get one of those little tripods like me.
Well, I do podcasts myself, but they're audio only, so I just do those with the headset on and don't worry about it. Forget my Georgia stuff behind me too. But
we won't hold that against you.
I paid a lot of money to go to school there. So.
That's right. I didn't know that when we went to Hall of Fame. Last month or 2 months ago?
About a month and a half.
A month and a half. Yeah. I didn't know all that Georgia stuff about you. You play ball at Georgia.
It was a walk on.
What position was that?
I was a long snapper. I was a special teamer.
Hey man, that's a very underappreciated position. Because
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say if you have a terrible snapper, you'll know. They're not appreciated when they don't screw up.
Well, it was one of those lucky things. This was back in the day when the NCAA only did allow athletes only dorms.
Uh-huh.
And my father had a coworker who was a letterman and a legacy at Georgia back in the 60s. And he pulled a few strings because I actually went to a local community college for like 2 semesters and transferred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he pulled some strings for me to be able to stay in the athlete's dorm. And I had gone to football camp there when I was in high school because it was an invite-only camp.
Right.
And that's back in the Vince Dooley days. By the time I got there was when Ray Goff was the coach. And
okay, I remember Ray. Yeah.
The guy that was their long snapper was, I think, a junior or a senior, but he blew his knee out. And,
man! Wow.
Some of the guys knew that I had done that in high school, and so they said, "Hey, would you like to?" I'm like, "Yeah, but they're not going to take me. I'm not big enough. Of course, they didn't have star ratings back then when I was playing, but I would have been at best a 2-star guy, maybe. I was a 1-star high school. Right. I made all county, and I made all conference. But I didn't play the Shrine Bowl or nothing. I was one of those guys. Yeah. And so the special teams coach came and gave me a tryout, and most of my tryout have revolved around could I long snap, and that's kind of how it came to be. And then it just, I think, I don't know, I never got verification. I think as time went on, they realized I was dedicated to working out. I was dedicated to showing up to practice. I kept my grades up. So it was a slot they could fill without having to use a scholarship.
There you go. Yeah.
So that was an advantage to them,
Yeah.
And I was one of those people who was smart enough not to take out student loans, but I had to work all the time to pay off college and sell a motorcycle. And I had some issues.
I know how that was because I wasn't a scholarship person. I screwed around in college. My parents paid for the first go around, and they said, "Well, you blew your first and only chance. If you want to go back, you got to pay for it yourself." So I worked for 2 years to finally get my degree. So, yeah.
So did you go to school down there? Are you a Carolina guy?
No, I'm actually a College of Charleston guy.
Oh, you're a party boy then. CSC's a party school.
Yeah, then because I got my first taste of real freedom and didn't dedicate myself. I ended up back at Trident Tech, which we affectionately call the University of Rivers, which is
right.
Which is basically that's mainly where people would go to start, like get your first couple of years in and then transfer to a big school. I kind of did I did the reverse. So
I was actually born in Charleston. My dad's
a
grad. My dad's from Columbia, South Carolina. So
I got you.
And I have a really, really good friend. It's Crazy Train. Freaks more people out when they find out that once I left professional wrestling, I actually work in the behavioral health and mental health field and have for about 15 years now.
Now that's irony right there.
Well, I actually had kind of started that when I was starting to wind down my bookings and not working full time, because my kids started getting old enough. I wanted to pay more attention to them, and my oldest son had some issues himself, so I needed to come off the road. I started out that just kind of part-time working at Marshall Pickens, which is the mental hospital here in Greenville, South Carolina.
Okay.
and it just kind of worked its way now. And so they always find that funny. I was like, oh, it's a shoot, guys.
It's funny, but it's awesome at the same time. I mean, but good for you, man. I mean, you're doing, not to sound facetious, but you're doing the Lord's work. Completely trust me. I've had plenty of therapy over the years with certain things.
Well, the COC made me think. One of my favorite therapists, a good friend of mine that worked with me at a facility I worked at, probably about 10 years ago now. She was a COC grad. So
okay, yeah.
And I can't remember where she did her master's but she did her undergrad at COC.
Here's a quick story for you. I always like to get guests on and tell stories. So here's some irony. So Mike Mooneyham, Thomas Simpson, myself, and a guy named Jameson Scott Rufio Rush, who used to run roads with me.
That's the first guy you named. I don't know. I'm not friends with.
Yeah. We all had the same English teacher, Nan Morrison, who was like the head of the English department. There's some
at
irony
COC?
for you. At COC, yep.
Well, if she was there when Mike was there, that was a long time ago.
She was been there for years, yeah. So I guess, because Mike would be the senior guy, then Thomas would be the next oldest than me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think I'm older than Thomas, but obviously not as old as Mike. No offense, Mike.
No offense. No offense to Mike. But
I love you, Mike.
Oh, let me tell you, Pete.
He was on our first wrestling podcast when we talked about the first Starcade. So yeah, I love Mike.
I love Mike, but our schedules don't mesh up. I've tried to get Mike on here, and it just has not worked out. One day I will. One day it's going to happen because I think a lot of him.
Well, just pick at him and tell him he's retired now, so he doesn't have the time.
Oh, he does. He has the time, but he likes to spend the time vacationing and eating. Is what?
As his Facebook post will show you. He has at least 3 a day of look at what I'm eating today, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. But I think the world of him and Miss Ruth. They're nice people, and they've always treated me well. So. But one day I'll get Mike on the show for sure.
Cool.
But
good.
The PS to that story is when him and Shauna also got the Sex Lies and Headlocks book published.
Yeah.
Apparently Nan Morrison had read it and sent him an email, not realizing he was the Mike Mooneyham in her class, saying how much she enjoyed the book, and it said, "Oh, well, you didn't enjoy my writing so well when I was in your class."
Wow. I thought the payoff was gonna be that she sent him a proofread where he screwed up and his editor did a good job.
No, here's the payoff. When I don't know about when he went, but the first day I went to her class, she said I have a 63% dropout rate, and the rest of you will be lucky to make a C in my course. Now, how intimidating is that?
I had a creative writer. I double majored in English composition and music history, and one of my creative writing professors, he was kind of that way. Yeah. And his bark was way worse than his bite. He liked to scare people off, and I remember he. Well,
Thomas, that asshole, he made an A, so I didn't. I promise you, I didn't.
I remember Professor Standridge. I remember when Rusty was his first name. When Rusty had. He had like a writing group that was not credited, but it was just a private. It was a group that met at night at a local restaurant there in Athens, and he would invite some of his better students to critique these people, to help them. And one of the students was like a commuter student that was in their 50s and just taking classes part time, and just was interested in creative writing. And why they chose to go, I guess maybe because they were local. To go to UGA, it would make more sense to go to community college, but oh well. And they were very old, and this guy was like a Vietnam veteran and very realistic in how he saw things. And one of the students that he had that was in the group really probably needed to switch her major. She was an English major, and I don't think she had what it took, just in my opinion. And she was a very conservative Christian Bob Joneser type. And they got this argument about using the F-bomb.
Oh dear.
It was hilarious because I'm like, I know Rusty stuck me with that group on purpose. I'm like, you gave me those two people to critique on purpose. And he's like, yeah, I kind of figured you'd have fun with that one. I said, I owe you one. So, this guy was a cool professor, but he had a BFA and an MFA from Arkansas,
Uh-huh.
and he was a poet. That's what he always wanted to do, and he wrote great poetry.
Oh, wow.
But I remember when he took the interview, he was telling me a story one time when he took the interview to get the job at UGA, he had to borrow a coat and tie from a friend of his that was a professor there that taught in the drama department. Because he's like, I didn't own a coat and tie. I'm a poet. What do I need a coat and tie for? You know, I mean,
they're usually a little eccentric. They don't wear. They don't
I mean,
they don't wear that kind of stuff.
He was the only college professor I had at Georgia that was a male that had earrings. So
like the irony of that, we're talking about creative writing a little bit, and I was the editor of my creative writing magazine in high school.
Wow.
How about them donuts? So,
where did you go to high school? You've got to be a Charleston boy.
At Goose Creek High School, right down the road.
I still think the hottest I've ever been in my life, and I grew up, and I lived a couple years in Louisiana and New Orleans. I lived in the Panhandle of Texas. I grew up mostly in the South. Still think the hottest I've ever been was a show at Burke High School in Charleston. In like August. Oh Lord, that was oh my God.
We're notorious for our heat, and the only place that I found hotter in August was Orlando, Florida. Orlando gets pretty darn hot in summer.
Mobile can get really hot.
So I've never been to Mobile, so I don't. I can't judge. Though I've been.
Charleston's rough. I love it. It's my hometown, but boy,
I love it. I love it here.
You got to chew your air before you breathe it in that time of year.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, you cut through it with a knife and fork, pretty much. The humidity.
Trust me, New Orleans can get like that too. It really can.
I've heard. Now, I've never been down there, but my father has, and he's told me. He said it gets pretty hot down there too. So anything where you're around water on a peninsula or anything like that, humidity is just. Compare that to the 6 months I spent out in the desert. It's like, man, it's so hot in the desert. Well, yeah, during the daytime it is, but man, at night there's no humidity to hold anything in, and the nights are really cool and they're nice, and it's like, it'll drop from like 100 to like 65.
Yeah, and I spent significant amount of times in Colorado and Utah, which are the exact opposite. Like I would laugh there. They have these things called swamp coolers that actually they're like big window units, and they have a little pan underneath them that has water running into it. That a big circular fan, with the idea is it puts moisture in the air because evaporation causes cooling.
Yes.
And I used to always laugh at people out there like, well, where I'm from, we try to take the moisture out of the air.
Out of the air, exactly. Yes.
We don't try to put it into the air. I was like, that's just so funny to me. And I remember as a kid in New Orleans, you could literally set your watch by the time that you had the thunder shower every afternoon, no matter what time.
There you go.
4:15 every afternoon. It downpoured for 10 minutes. And then that was the best time to go looking for crawfish, because that's when there was flooding out in the
the flooding would bring them back up.
And we go out and get you had a good one. You have a good boil that weekend. So there you go.
Yeah, because we ironically, I mean, we had them here. The neighborhood that I lived in was full of them. We'd catch them all the time as kids.
Crawdads?
Yeah, oh yeah. That's crazy. So I've got you on, and we've talked about crawdads, creative writing, and that kind of stuff.
And playing one of the most unforgotten positions in football.
And we haven't even touched pro wrestling yet. So.
All I said was I ran a hot show. I worked a hot show in Burke. That's closest we've got to wrestling. You can't say I'm not diversified, ladies and gentlemen.
He is a very diversified guest, for sure. Man, let's do so. It's not really a wrestling podcast, but let's talk some wrestling stuff anyway, because that's part of my fan base. All right, I'm gonna let you tell it, because
story.
Well, no, just how did you start, and who were you trained by? And I know one of the gentlemen because he actually helped me out a couple of years before his unfortunate passing. So I know you're going to talk about Buck a little bit.
Sure, we'll talk about Buck. Wrestling, I was finished with school, and I met my now ex-wife, and we got engaged, and about a few months later, we found out she was pregnant, so that changed everything. I was kind of planning to go back to school and get take my GRE and go to grad school, and thinking, well, maybe I could teach college. Well, I mean, what the hell are you going to do with an English and a music degree besides teach? Pretty
much, because that's where I was at. Yeah.
I think I had these grand designs at one time of I'll be a music critic. And if I was going to go that route, I probably should have gone into journalism, not
journalism. Yeah,
like Mike
yeah.
Mooneyham instead of.
Yeah.
But I didn't, But so I'd always wanted to be a wrestler. I mean, even though I spent all this time in Utah and Colorado and Louisiana, most of my youth was here in South Carolina, especially as a teenager here in the Mid-Atlantic territory. Right. So we're talking the heyday of, the Four Horsemen. So I grew up a huge wrestling fan.
Yeah.
And I obviously, we've already talked about, I had the athletic background with football, and that wasn't the only sport I played. And I'm a musician as well, so I had the performance, background as well. And even before the internet, I was smart to the. I didn't know how much of work wrestling was, but I could see that it was as much show business as it was sport, even as a kid.
Sure.
So I was like, this is something I can do. That's something I can do. And then you go to college, you start having kids, and that goes on the back burner. And because I had to go to work right away, I got a job to a temp agency, and Hitachi, like the televisions and electronics. They used to have a big plant here in Greenville, and that made big screen, the old school projection big screen televisions.
Yes, yeah.
And I was working through a temp agency on third shift there at their plant, and I got to talking one night to some of the guys that were in my department, and I was telling about how I'd always wanted to be a pro wrestler, and this was the very, very early days of the internet. So you're talking like 95, 96.
And we still had to put the AOS disc in and make noise.
Yeah. I mean, you thought if you had was it 28.8, you were like just flying.
Yeah, you thought you were. That was fast. Yeah.
And I have buddies in IT, so they had that, and I was, oh man, I'm high speed. But anyway. I had looked into maybe going all the way even out to California to go to APW and Roland Alexander. That's about as far as I got, And,
so, just from seeing him on Beyond the Mat, is that?
Oh no, this is before Beyond the Mat. This is before
really?
Beyond the Mat.
Oh,
yeah, it just happened. This is like the early days of GeoCities website that he had.
Oh my God, GeoCities! Oh,
that's a throw. This was on AOL, dude. This is take it back,
I think that was everybody's first website. I think.
And I remember I had looked into trying to find Moolah, and she wasn't training guys at the time anymore. And I tried to look into like Ivan Koloff. Crazy that I wound up being friends with both of them once I became a wrestler.
Yeah.
But Ivan wasn't training anymore. The Andersons, so nobody that I knew around here was training anymore. I think if I remember right, had even sent a letter down to the Malinkos. Of course, Boris had died by then, but Joe and Dean were running the school for their dad, And so I was talking to these guys at lunch, like, well, you don't need to do any of that, man. There's a guy right here who's the heads of our department who's getting ready to leave. He turned his notice in because he's going to open a wrestling school. He's a retired pro wrestler, and I'm like, who is he? I'm figuring I'm a huge mark. I've probably heard of the guy.
Yeah.
They say his name's Brody Chase, and I remember Brody as a guy that did enhancement work for the Crockett's and the old 605. I was like, yeah, I know him, and so they introduced him to me when he came in to relieve us the next morning. And sure enough, he was getting ready to start school, and I talked to Brody, and he started running his school, and he had another guy that was training with him named Mickey Free.
Yep, Mickey Free.
Yeah, who was training with him, and not long after.
Not the guy from Shalimar. Anybody that's familiar with the music, a different.
Right,
Mickey
exactly.
Big muscular guy, bald guy, from what I remember.
Yeah. He's bald now. He had hair back then, but he's a personal trainer and runs his own gym now. Right. Does really good with it. He's really good at that. Mm-hmm. But they were running the school together, and I guess I've been training about a month when a guy that they knew just showed up one day, and it was this big, tall, 6'5" dude with a blimmy mustache and missing his two front teeth, and it was the redneck Bubba Kirk, or as they called him, Big Bubba Kirk.
I remember Bubba Kirk too.
And Bubba, for your listeners that don't know, he was in the first class of men that Moolah ever trained in '85. Yes. And I vaguely remembered him because he went under his real name, Philip Newkirk, as a enhancement guy for Vince. And this around the same time, in late '80s. Right. And to say Bubba's snug is an understatement.
Yeah.
And to say I can be snug is also an understatement. And if you know Brody and Mickey, they're both very light.
Yeah.
And I can never verify, and I can't even get Brody to admit it. And I talked to him like a month ago, and I couldn't get him to admit it. You passed me off to Bubba because you just got tired of getting tatered left and right.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Brody's good people, man. We always liked Brody.
Oh, Brody's a trip. He's hilarious. Yeah. And I told him, this is about a month. This is, you know, right after the Hall of Fame, and I showed him some of the pictures, and I said, I've never said this to you before, Brody, and it was just, you know, 20 years ago. Thank you. You or 25 years ago now. You are part of this. I never thought I'd be in a Hall of Fame. I got to live my dream, and you were a major reason for that. And he was, you know, he's like, no problem.
Talk about a guy that we could have had on that Hall of Fame roster for sure.
Oh yeah. You think I had a long acceptance speech? Give Brody a live mic. Brody loves to hear his own voice.
Yeah.
But
Brody or George. I think they must have all like went to the same promo training class.
Well, think about it. George and Brody were both doing enhancement work for the Crocketts around the same time. Maybe
exactly.
The water back there.
Yeah.
That the CNN Center. I don't know. But anyway, yeah. So Brody and them kind of passed me off to Bubba. Bubba really took up my training from there. And one of the first areas that they helped me get booked was locally in Greer, which is, you know, between Greenville and Spartanburg.
Yep, I know exactly what that is.
The booker for there was a guy named Buck Forrester, just like you were talking about, who was an old-timer that had wrestled in smaller territories and was from Greer and had wrestled mostly under a mask in his career.
Exactly,
like
I was going to say, he was under a hood. You wouldn't really know who he was, yeah.
And then they entered, and another guy that was coming in and helping him out a lot was another old-timer named Bill White, who some of the listeners might remember. He was once again, they called him a journeyman back then, an enhancement talent for the Crocs in the 70s. And the two of them really polished me up a lot. You know, I had this grand idea of Crazy Train being like this reviled Abdul the Butcher kind of heel, you know? And of course, society and the business were changing in the mid-90s.
Sure.
Combined with the fact that I just don't have it in me to be mean and get booed like that. I don't like that. And so I think Buck and Bill realized that very early on. And I had already was bringing the teddy bear to the ring. For those that have not seen me, I always brought a teddy bear to the ring. That was my manager.
You had the hospital-looking smocks and
I had scrubs on. Said Department of Mental
Scrubs, yep.
And I wrestled it and taped up Chuck Taylor's old Converse canvas. I mean, I looked the part, you know, and I had the long, wild, crazy hair at the time, which I looked terrible with, but I realized, well, it's the gimmick, so I got to keep it.
I'm going to try to throw up an old pic or two on top of it.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine.
You know, we'll do a cutaway because I have those pictures. When we used to work Merlin's together. I
you gave me one at the Hall of Fame.
Sure did.
I need to scan it in and get it because it's an old photo. That's how old me and
that is like a 2001 photo, either 2001 or 2002, I believe. It's pretty far.
Yeah, that was towards the end of when I was, you know, I wasn't about 2004. I think was about the time I stopped wrestling full time.
Yeah.
And then worked till 2010 when the doctor said, "No, you're done." But you know, back to Buck and Bill, they realized there was something there that you could make a baby face out of. And they told me, do this, do that, that kind of thing. And then I never looked back. I was a baby face the rest of my career. The only time I can ever think of me being a heel after that was a time I went down to Georgia for a show for Rick Michaels, and he's like, "I'm short on heels. I need you to heel." And because I like Rick, I healed for Rick as best as I could. And then when I went to Puerto Rico, and Susan Green warned me, because through Bubba and Bill and Buck, I met Susan and became really close with her, and she became like a mentor and kind of finished off the polishing that Buck and Bill had done.
Yeah.
And she had warned me, and Bill White had warned me, you're not Hispanic. You're not going to get cheered in Puerto Rico.
No.
No matter how hard you try, you know. And I said, "Well, Susan, you're a baby face down there." She goes, "Yeah, but I've been doing this 20 years before."
There you go. Yeah, they know her. They've seen her down there.
Right. So she's like, and a dirty white boy, Tony Anthony, you know, who does not get enough love and respect, in my opinion, because most fans only know him as TL Hopper, the wrestling plumber, and that's,
right.
That
was just a small piece of his career.
Yeah, if you want to see Tony, go watch his stuff with Dirty White Girl from Memphis. Go watch his stuff with Ron Wright from Smoky Mountain, early Smoky Mountain. That's the real. But he was the guy they tagged me with. Mm-hmm. And I remember him saying in the locker room, you seem nervous, kid. I was like, I can't heal. I don't know how to heal. At the time I went out to Puerto Rico, I've been working about 8-10 years. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, kid. We'll get heat." And he wasn't lying.
You can't you can't heal.
Just follow me, kid. They're gonna hate you.
Crazy Train can't heal, and I can't babyface, no matter what I've tried.
And I tell you, he wasn't lying. Bill, the stories Bill White warned me about literally having to fight for your life to get back to the locker room. Yeah, they did not like us. they wanted to kill us. So, it was what it was. But hey, I had a great time. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And it was. Tony was like another one of those things of, oh, here's a guy I saw on TV when I was a wrestling fan, and now I'm getting tagged with him. So I look back on my career and I realize I'm not that well known. I was an independent jabroni, but I still went to places and I did things and I got to meet people. I mean, Mike Mooneyham is a great example. Here's a guy I could call. I did just 3-4 years ago. We started doing our wrestling podcast. I called him up and say, "Hey, Mike, it's Crazy Train. Hey, how you doing? Love to have you on the podcast. We're going to talk about the first Starrcade." Sure. What's a good time for you? I could never imagine something like that. But ask Jonathan Bolick, thank God I'm here playing football at Georgia. This is a miracle. In 1993-94, he'd have never. If you'd have told him, fast forward to 2021, and you'd have Ricky Morton on your speed.
Sure.
Dial.
Absolutely.
It's like no way. But it is what it is.
That's what I find amazing about it. I mean, you go back to Mike for a second. I was reading that column. Oh my God.
As a kid, probably.
As a kid, yeah. I read that column every Sunday in the Post and Courier. I read that column, and
even being up here in the upstate, he was that one guy. Because, Meltzer and Keller and those guys weren't getting love from the offices back then.
Right.
He was the one guy who was a quote-unquote legit journalist who you'd even hear Jim Ross or Shivani or Lance Russell mention on the show.
People that, that was actually well-liked, guys actually liked him,
outside of Bill Apter, he was the guy, because they didn't talk about the dirt sheet guys back then.
No.
So if you ever heard Jim Ross or Tony Schiavone, I don't remember Bob Cottle doing it, but he might have. I don't know. Les Thatcher probably did at some point, when they're doing their commentary. He was the only legit journalist you'd hear him say, "Oh, if you read this article by Mike Mooneyham,
I know that his name would get thrown around a lot, and then I want to say I even heard it on ESPN one time, and I was like, "This dude's a big deal." Like, you know.
The editor and co-host of
course,
podcast,
Flair loves him,
Oh,
so.
Yeah. Well, the co-host and editor of my podcast grew up in the Chicago area, and he still lives in Chicago. And so he knew the Mooneyham name because of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
But when we got him on when we had him on the show, I said, "Have you got all his accolades down there?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I could hear the shock in his voice. Mm-hmm. He had done the research right before we connected the call with Mike. And he's like, "How many Hall of Fames are you in?" he always acts the same way whenever we have Susan on. It's like, I said at this point, it's like literally every phone call I have with Susan is like, "Okay, what Hall of Fame are you being inducted in this month, Susan?"
Right.
And she just laughs,
But see, that's the thing. When you meet them though, that's kind of stuff doesn't go to their head.
No.
They have no ego about that kind of thing whatsoever, which is what makes them great people. So I always enjoyed being around them.
The only egos I've seen in wrestling were usually the guys like me that never didn't make it.
Right.
I did work a show with Jerry Lawler one time, and he was a little standoffish, but he wasn't totally standoffish,
Yeah. You make a good point. It is always some independent guy.
Piper was a little weird when I worked the show with Piper, but I had been forewarned that Piper was a bit paranoid, you know, and not that he wasn't rude to me. He came to the locker room, shook my hand, talked to me, you know. I don't know what I was expecting, but I mean,
I think Manny Fernandez was the one guy people would warn me about, especially up at Eagles. Especially up at Eagles, you know, when he was up there.
I throw Manny under the bus all the time because I worked that show where he pulled the gun on the promoter up here in the Upstate, which I mean is legendary in the Indies around here.
Yeah.
And when Jericho made that comment on AEW a couple months ago, when he just, just off cover, he's like, "Oh my God, this is as bad as working the show with Manny Fernandez."
Oh,
the guy that does my podcast with me, Seth, because I don't watch AEW, I don't watch the current product. He immediately called me. I'm like, "Something wrong?" Because it was late at night, and he's like, "Chris Jericho just threw Manny Fernandez under the bus about working the show." I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
And he told me, and he's like, "I would have never understood what he was talking about if I hadn't heard your voice." And look, Manny helped me get booked up in New Jersey one time, so I'm not going to throw him too far under the bus.
There you go. So, yeah.
But, and in my defense of Manny is this. I've said this on my own podcast. Mm-hmm. Manny is still a brother.
Yeah.
And there are certain amounts of leeway that he's going to get with me that people that I like more personally and I respect and trust more personally outside of the business, they're going to get that respect and that trust on a personal level. But when it comes to business, at the end of the day, Manny's still my brother.
Yeah, sure.
And there are certain things. I understand kayfabe's dead, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain things about the business and certain stories I've heard and certain things I've witnessed myself I'm never going to tell a fan, ever.
Yeah.
I would tell you off mic once we turn the cameras off.
Sure, yeah. There's some things that just don't need to be on.
You're in the business.
Yeah.
You've earned it. You have earned the right to have that knowledge.
Yeah, there's stories I'm never going to tell on this show or any other show for that matter. I mean,
but you've paid your dues. You've gone up and down the road.
Some things got to remain sacred, man. Come on,
And it's like I tell everybody. I said at the end of the day, it's like I got so mad when there was that seemed to be this thing about 7-8 years ago to show those real candid footage of Sheiky Baby when he was obviously impaired.
Oh, yeah.
And like fan conventions. And people are like, "Why are you defending Iron Sheik? You don't know him that well." I said, "That's my brother."
Yeah.
I don't know some of my cousins well, but I would defend them. I said, "How would you feel if a cousin you didn't know lived 4 or 5 states away?"
Yeah.
And people were laughing at him when it obvious that he had a problem and was going in a public setting and broadcasting this problem. Oh, that pissed me off. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the same thing for me.
Right.
I mean, it's like, you're right. I don't know. I met Iron Sheik one time, and he was impaired then, But he's still part of my family.
Yeah.
And I do not find humor in you thinking it's funny making an ass of himself when he wouldn't be doing that. And it's like, you don't know what that man's been through.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, we have no idea what's going on.
Thank God that those two brothers did that biography, and a lot of people were like, "Oh God, his knees are shot, his ankles are shot. He's a legit badass. He was a bodyguard for the show." Yeah, this is stuff you didn't know. And you only have an inkling because I know what this travel schedule was for those guys back in his era, and I know the lack of medical insurance. I know the lack of doctors.
Yeah.
And so,
it's not like if John Cena stubs his toe and gets 8 weeks off,
Right.
They were, 300 days a year, and they didn't stop.
Oh, yeah.
I'll give you a perfect example. Tony Rose told that story where we were talking at the Hall of Fame. And
about an eye getting knocked out?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is back in the 70s. There wasn't no days off. She either completed the tour or she didn't, or she got fired.
You didn't get paid. You didn't get paid.
Yeah, you didn't get paid. It was brutal.
Cornette talks about all the time. He did the TV a week after his knee blew out from the scaffold match, and he's I had to because I was doing the loop. Why are you doing the loop? You just blew your knee out because I want to get paid.
You want to get paid? Yeah. I mean, it's a lot. There's still it's still a rough business, but compared to the 70s and 80s and further back, it's
I think, you know,
A lot different. Let's put it that way.
and I think that is part of why the business has changed so much. Everybody wants to talk societal, and society's changed, and television, and all that is pertinent, I think, to why the business has changed.
Mm.
But I think one of the biggest things that has changed, or why it's changed, is because the guys aren't as hungry as they used to be. And the gals aren't as hungry as they used to be. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that it is. And you don't have... When I was coming up, when you were coming up, we were the last to... Even though the territories had died, we were the last to benefit from, you know, some of the... Like the Bills and the Bucks. Wahoo McDaniel, I got to be really close with.
Yeah.
Blackjack Mulligan, I got to be close. These were guys who were in locker rooms. Still working the indies. Some of these guys would want to go on car rides with you. So we got that. They don't have that anymore. The way that the system has been set up now, you know, and so I'm not saying that it's so much better for those that are, and I respect anybody who puts on the boots and gets inside a ring and tries to do what we do.
Well, now I'm just talking about the top now. The indies are still pretty rough in a lot of areas.
Exactly.
You know, that's a, you know.
And that's the thing with, and I also hate Vince killed the territories. No, the territories killed the territories.
Yeah.
Because Bill Watts and
ways,
Fritz Von Erich and the Crockett's were all trying to go international, national themselves. He just beat them. And let's be honest, Fritz beat himself by not having control of his locker room. Jim Crockett beat himself, Junior beat himself, and he would have told you this, God rest his soul, because he did say it publicly.
He did say
bad business decisions.
So I should have been a better businessman, is what he said.
Right,
yeah.
and Bill Watts didn't have that because his territory was dependent upon the oil industry, and there was the oil bust.
Exactly,
so, completely out of Bill's hands, you know? So,
very dependent on what the... infrastructure in that particular territory.
Yes,
you know,
and like I said,
if people don't have money, the first thing they're going to do get rid of that disposable income. They ain't going to wrestling shows.
Right,
they're trying to eat.
Not when you're not when you can't pay the rent or your mortgage and put food on the table. No.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, like I said, I lived as a small child in Panhandle, Texas for a year. I know how dependent that area is on oil. You know.
Yeah.
So, but I think that, but you know, get off my soapbox. I don't think Vince killed the territories. I think other people. There were a lot of things that happened, but you can't lay it solely at Vince's feet. But with that being said, what Vince did, yes, it's made it better for a smaller number. Nobody ever thought anybody could make the kind of money like Austin and Rock made when you add in their merch. You know,
sure,
the kind of contracts he was signing. I mean, to be able to sign a guy like Brock Lesnar with his worth would have never even been thought of back in the territory days.
Yeah,
but. Like Jerry Jarrett, who's notorious for not paying the guys good. Even he's squeeze a penny so hard, make Abraham Lincoln fart. Yes,
right, exactly. Yeah,
I mean, there's a reason why they called the Tennessee loop the Nutrisystem loop, because you were going to lose weight on it. You know, but even he's made the point that if you think about the old territory system, a lot more guys were making a living doing what we do.
Yes.
Making a decent living, you know, they were able to feed their families, pay a rent, and a decent house, own 2 cars. That's like damn near impossible now.
Yeah,
because there's only a couple of places you can work in the world where you're going to get that kind of money, and it's so competitive that, you know, and it's just not going to happen. And yes, I believe what Randy Savage said about the cream rises to the top. I totally agree with that. But at the same time, because of the system Vince has made, do you see a guy like Harley Race in his heyday working in the system that exists now? No, he'd have flipped off. He'd have flipped him off and said, "Yeah, screw you."
Well, I was
he
shocked.
took a puff on his cigarette and just walked out the door. You know.
Well, I was shocked he even. I mean, I guess he did it for the money or the financial security. You know, the fact that he was even King Harley Race for a while is shocking. Yeah, I don't think Harley Race 1981 does that. You know.
No, I don't. But I also think Harley was at a point in his life, and I don't want to speak for Harley. You know.
Yeah.
I've met Harley a couple times. I love Harley. Even as a 70-something-year-old guy, he's scared to death.
Well, we're speculating here, but just
but I think if you go back and listen to his Hall of Fame induction, I think it's obvious that he realized his best days were past him.
Sure.
And this was just a nice paycheck for him and his wife to retire off of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
I don't fault anyone for that, you know. So.
And I do think that he does. Harley, in my opinion, and the few times I interacted with the man, and I love Harley to death, and I loved all the few times I got to spend with him. He was a very pragmatic guy, you know, and I think he was pragmatic enough to understand where he was in his life and his career at that point, and where the business had gone. It was going to be a nice last hurrah to get that many eyes on him.
There you go. Yeah. Exactly.
And Vince will never say this, but a lot of fans need to understand, because especially younger fans that have grown up where the WWE was the top dog, and my friends that are up north where it was always the top dog. Having Harley race, even at that advanced age, work your new guy that you've just made like the biggest star in the business, work him in an angle for your belt, immediately gives Hogan credibility in a lot of places he wasn't going to get it otherwise.
Sure, absolutely, yeah, that's a good point. Absolutely.
And so a lot of people don't understand. Well, Harley Race was past his prime, and he was tougher than Hogan. He was a better wrestler. Yes, all these are 100% true. But put yourself in the place of Vince McMahon. You got this guy who he is over like Rover in a million areas, but a couple of key areas, and you can't get him over. Well, you start looking at those areas, you're like, oh, it's Kansas City, it's Atlanta, it's the Carolinas.
Yeah.
Now I've got the guy that they know this dude is a badass, and they believe in him. So I'm going to put my top guy against that guy, and maybe in those areas where he's not over, he may not be over with those crowds, but at least they'll respect him because he got in the ring with Harley Race.
Yeah, I think that's where there's a lot of dichotomy amongst wrestling fans. You know, there's still, even today, there's that NWA versus WWF philosophy. You know,
I've always kind of hated that. Well,
let me just speak my piece, and then you can chime in. This is what it boils down to for me. I would get asked this question, especially when he would show up. He said, "What was your favorite?" Al Snow. I don't think I'm throwing him in under the bus by telling this story. Al Snow would say, "What was the best match at WrestleMania 3?"
Andre versus Hogan.
Well, of course, me being me, I'd say Savage versus Steamboat. Why? Because I appreciated that.
Because you're a smart mark that can't pull your head out of your ass and see it for what it really is. It's a business.
Well, when we're talking about business, absolutely.
I love you, brother.
Yeah. That's what's. But I understand what he's saying. That's what sold the pay-per-view. Or the show. That's what everybody wanted to see. It was Hogan. You know, I'm just talking about from a
right.
Which match did you? I guess the better question was, which match did you enjoy the most? Okay, I enjoyed Savage versus Steamboat, but to get my eyes on Savage versus Steamboat, yes, I wanted. Yeah, you wanted to see Hogan and Andre.
Well, one of the episodes of my podcast, cheap plug, Classic Wrestling Memories. Check us out on ClassicWrestlingMemories.com. Also check us out on GeekvilleRadio.com. That is actually our parent podcast, and all our podcasts are on there. But about a year ago, we did an episode
Shameless
called
plug. No, go. No, you're allowed. That's what.
If you will not put yourself over, nobody else will.
That's what.
That's one of the first things I learned in business.
That's why I have you on the show. I want you to promote whatever you got going on.
But anyways, we had an episode called Unpopular Opinions, where I took 3 opinions that I know are unpopular with not only other people in the business but a lot of fans. And one of those was Vince McMahon killed the territories. I already got that one out of my system.
Got that one out of the way.
Well, this argument we're having now, and the third one was Ronnie Garvin's world title run in '87 was a joke.
Okay, there's no argument. I mean, I'm just saying what I thought then. Being smarter and knowing the business like I know it now. Yeah, it's Hogan and Andre. I mean, if you ask me that question again, it's Hogan and Andre.
But here's the interesting take I took on this. It was we had already. Because Seth, my co-host, had already said many times, what we just said. The same, and he even used the Al Snow interview that you mentioned as well. That
Sure.
he agrees with Al. He understands as a business person that's what sold the show. The argument I made was that was the greatest match of WrestleMania history, and it's like I think it was a great match, and I think I've had the fortunate pleasure of talking to Ricky Steamboat about the match, person to person.
Sure.
And I think it is a gold standard of what the matches could be in the 80s for that style.
Yeah.
And by and far was very different than anything that Vince McMahon was doing in the WWE at the time. But I break down, it bothered me, and this goes more into the NWA versus WWE argument you're talking about. So it's circuitous, but I'll get to it, okay?
No, I'm with this argument. I'm sitting under your learning tree right now.
Was that you grew up like I did, Mid-Atlantic territory. You grew up in which was the Cadillac of the territories. It was where everybody knew if you were going to come work in the Carolinas, you better put your working boots on.
Well, and just to throw in a quick comment right here, I had a conversation with a friend about this. When we were kids, we thought that shit was real.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a bottom line.
Part of the reason we thought it was real was look back at the old Crockett territory. It didn't matter if Dusty, Dory Jr., George Scott. It didn't matter who was booking the territory. Okay. In the Crockett territory, it was all about titles, occasionally political beliefs. Russians versus Americans, or personal. Money. You took my money. You took my you took my girlfriend. Whatever.
Mainly personal. Yeah. You took my girlfriend. You broke my arm. You broke my leg. You attacked me.
You threw fireball in my face.
Fireball at me. Yeah. I still love that to this day.
And most of the southern territories were like that. The Crockett's were a little different. Their thing was you had to have working boots to work Crockett. This was the territory of the Johnny Valentines and the Wahoos and the Flairs and the Steamboat. Whereas in Memphis, it was more about the smaller guys that brawled and could talk. The Lawlers, the Dundees.
Yeah.
In Mid-South, it was the big former football players, the Duggins and the Dr. Deaths. And, But they all, in Florida, was kind of more the amateur wrestling because of Eddie Graham and Bob Roop and those guys. But they all kind of had that same ideology in their angles. So it was all about athleticism. It was all about, and your blow-offs were often gimmick matches where there was blood,
Yeah.
It was a cage match. It was a Russian chain match. It was a first blood match. It was a lumberjack match. It was something that you had built up the drama.
Strap match, dog collar match, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it built its way up to that apex that you knew, oh crap, somebody's going to get hurt tonight. And you as a fan, I know because I was one of them, were willing to pay money to see that.
Yeah.
And that was never the philosophy up north. Even when Vince's dad and his granddad, that was just never the philosophy up there. And so my argument on that Steamboat Savage match, both guys who have backgrounds in Southern territories, Savage had that great run with his dad, running the Outlaw show, and then, selling out houses all over the Memphis territory against Lawler based on that, Steamboat all these years in Georgia and the Carolinas, they both were very, very, and come on, both of them with legitimate amateur backgrounds in baseball, incredible athletes, two of the greatest pure athletes who ever had the business were Randy Savage and Steamboat, without question. But the way that they built that match and the way they told the story did not fit. They didn't match up. This was a blood feud. This was a match that was precipitated because Randy Savage tried to end Ricky Steamboat's career. He tried to crush his larynx.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And let me break it down for your listeners the way I broke it down for ours. Essentially, Randy Savage tried to prevent this man from being able to provide for his family the way he provided for his family. He was literally taking food off of his table.
Right.
This was a story that was being told. Okay? And your answer to that is really only about an 8 or 12 minute match if you break down the time. That was technical. That was all roll ups and small. No.
You know what? You made a good point. Yeah. You
no.
made an excellent point.
And then you throw in and once again, all due respect to to George Animal Steel, who I
Right.
liberally stole spots from because we
Yeah.
both did a lot of comedy. And I understood at that point George is not the menacing heel he was when Bruno talked him out of quitting wrestling part-time and doing it full-time and coming to New York, right?
Sure.
That's 20 years earlier.
Right.
But George was a comedy guy. And then you throw him in the mix and Liz, it makes no sense whatsoever. So, yes, from a scientific work rate, to use a smart mark term, golden standard for that style of match, 80s, without question. But that match does not fit the story they were telling. And one thing could have changed all of that. One thing could have changed all of that.
Hang on half a second, Train.
Sure.
Now I'm starting to hear that TV. I wasn't before, but I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. We got the TV going in the
Yeah,
background.
I understand.
Yeah.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised one of my cats hasn't jumped up on my face for the viewers.
No,
yet.
I just didn't want the mic to pick up whatever's going on back there. So I was just trying to get it turned down a little bit.
Okay.
I'm in my man's house, so I want him to be able to do what he wants, but at the same time, it's
But
like,
you are a guest.
but I gotta record the show, man. I mean, like,
So back to But what I was saying was, so yes, all those things, gold standard for work rate, scientific, and all that, but doesn't fit. There was one thing they could have done, and Steamboat could have done this, that would have changed the entire viewpoint I had on this. Had Steamboat done one interview where he said, the thing that makes you tick, Randy Savage, is being the Intercontinental Champion. And I'm going to do whatever I can to take that belt away from you. Because if I win that belt, then I know I've done to you what you tried to do to me.
I've
You know,
harmed
just
you
did that-
the way. Yeah, exactly. That makes sense.
Dusty said about Flair all the time. The what makes you tick Ric Flair is that. But Steamboat never cut that promo.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Baby, let me tell you something about Ric Flair. The only thing about Ric Flair that cares about is that world heavyweight title.
that gold around his waist.
That gold around his waist. If I take that belt, I take something away from Ric Flair.
And
that's
I know
what
how
I'm
to do
here
it
to
because
do.
I've been there 2 times.
I've been there 2 times, baby. Yeah, I love Dusty. Dusty was
I told you
so
my Dusty
awesome.
story, didn't I?
Oh, is there a Dusty story? I
worked
have one, but I have one that's kind of it's more of a Dustin story, but I can't really tell it. So
I worked for Dusty when he was running Turnbuckle Championship.
Okay, Turnbuckle, yeah.
And Lodi, Brad Kane, was helping him find guys, and Brad goes back to his career was started. Brody helped him out when he started too, even though he's a North Carolina guy. So I've known Lodi forever too. And anyway, Lodi had seen me at a show in Georgia, and I hadn't seen him in a few years, and he got my contact information and helped me get booked on the show.
Yeah.
And I went down there, and the promoter I was normally working for in Georgia at the time kind of had a little beef with Dusty, and neither one of them would ever admit it.
Right.
They kind of wanted to be the top dog in Georgia.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't think this was malicious. I don't think Dusty did this on purpose, especially in hindsight. But I got done with my match, and Lodi came up to me and said, "Hey, Dusty wants to bring you back." And he gave me the date, and I said, "Brad, I can't do that, man. I'm already booked for this other promoter in another part of Georgia.
I need that kid with the teddy bear, baby."
And so,
Let me stop. I gotta stop.
so Lodi's like, "I totally understand, brother. I totally understand. You don't double book yourself.
Yeah.
I respect that, right?" So I'm getting ready to leave, and he goes, "Dude, Dream wants to talk to you." I'm like, "Come again?"
Yeah. Hello.
I grew up in this territory. This is like a god to me,
Yeah.
And I had met Ric Flair at this point. I had become friends with Ricky Morton, but this is still it's the effing Dream, dude.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm already marking out the whole time. So I'm working on a show that he's booking. That he's running.
Sure. Yeah.
So he used to run his shows at the Warner Robins High School in Warner Robins, Georgia.
Yeah.
So he's kind of got his little office, gimmick set back up in like the coach's office, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I tell him, okay. And so he's sitting there, and he had his base like trucker cap on, I think, and like a Western shirt, and he had to dip in. I sit there, he's like, sit down, kid. And he said, I understand I was talking to Lodi. Or I think they call him Lodi. So
Low die.
Talking to Lodi. And he said that you couldn't make the next show I want to bring you in on. I said, and I told him, I said, look, all due respect.
Sir,
I said,
yeah, sir.
Yeah, I said, you must understand, I grew up in the Carolinas. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm selling for you. I'm a mark for you, Dream. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
I said, but I'm already booked on another show on that date. Mm-hmm. And I said, the people that brought me in this business, and it's always worked for me, is you don't double book yourself. You don't no-show. You don't no-show your bookings. Yeah. And I said, had you booked me first, Dream, and this, I would be loyal to you. Yeah. And he was like, oh, I can totally respect that. I appreciate that, But you had something special, kid. You had something real special. I think you're a pretty good baby face, and I was kind of going to try to help you out with a few things. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but I was a pretty good baby face myself back in the day. And I just thought, I was only like a 3-time world heavyweight wrestling champion for the NWA. I was only the biggest draw in the business for about 15 years. I just thought I could share some of that experience with you. But you got another book, and I understand that's okay, though. We probably going to use you somewhere else. So you'll hear from us eventually. And they did bring me back about a month later.
Oh, good, good.
But it was this whole... I had.
He was selling you. He was selling you, man.
Oh, yeah,
he was selling you.
Papa Strode dying when we did a podcast together and tell me the story. And I'm like, he is completely and utterly burying me.
Yeah.
Putting himself over and making me thank him about it when it's over.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I walked out of that office and grabbed my bag, and Dustin and Barry were standing out there. And Dustin's like, yeah.
Okay.
And I'd already.
Because you could have been talking about Horowitz. I need to clarify.
Right. It was a little bit of, and I already knew Barry a little bit because of Susan training with his dad, and I was a friend with his dad. So, and Dustin and I gotten to know a couple of shows. So this is the 3rd or 4th time I worked with them. I was starting to build a decent relationship with both Dustin and Barry. And Dustin's like, well, what did my dad have to say? And I said, I think I just got a master's class on getting worked. He said, yeah, my dad will do that. He goes, can you imagine being raised by that? I said, no. So yeah. That was a master's class. That's what happened.
I could tell the first half of that story. Dustin told me a story one time that, and I was blown away. Like, apparently a gentleman had a heart attack on a plane. And Dusty was able to give him CPR, and they got him on the ground, and
it's a kiss of the dream that brought him back to the grave.
The dream brought him back to life, baby. Yeah.
It's like, I don't try to be I'm trying not to be blasphemous, But
no, I'm not either. But I mean,
but I could hear Dustin. I resurrected that man. The Grim Reaper himself was there. God, how much do I miss that man?
But I told the Reaper, no, baby. I tell you, no match for the bionic elbow of Dusty Rhodes. You understand? I'm the dream, baby.
You can come get him later, but let him kick out this one time.
Let him kick out one time, right?
It's a 2.5, brother. Let me book the show. Let me book the show. I'm a great genius. And it's like, once again, growing up this area, back to what I was talking about earlier with like the Steamboat Savage thing. Dusty got that.
Once we get off of that, I want you to go into the Ron Garvin thing.